when Catra comes near her. A little bit hero, princess of power.
Happy Halloween. This is episode 4 of the She-Ra, Princess of Power Comprehensive Review Series. And appropriately so for today, we have Catra, the jealous beauty of the Princess of Power toy line. She has the same honor as Skeletor, since she is the main villain and nemesis of She-Ra. She was introduced in the first wave of figures in 1985, and she's the only villain in the line for 1985. Catra was first developed by Justine Dancer, along with She-Ra, Bo, Cowl, and some other characters. She became a part of the Horde when it was decided that the Horde would become the main villains of the Princess of Power mythology. It's kind of strange how that all worked out. The girls department at Mattel did have a female toy line that they were working on, a female action adventure toy line that they were working on as an idea for a flanker line, what they called a flanker line, which was a strategy that they had developed to help increase the sales for Barbie. They didn't know what to do with that concept, so they eventually shelved or tabled that female action adventure toy line. And around a similar time frame, the boys department had seen the sales figures for Teela. And the sales figures were such that it was unavoidable to see that girls were partaking in the Masters of the Universe brand as well. So it made sense to include more female characters in the Masters of the Universe line, and so they decided to start working on increasing the number of female characters in the line. At that point, it was only Teela and Evelyn, so it looks as if they were planning out a faction of heroic characters that would have been mostly female. That's the way it looks like it was heading. And so they started developing that first character, which turned out to be a female He-Man. And this is the character. At that time, she wasn't named, but this female He-Man was being developed. And eventually, the girls' department looked at what the boys' department was working on and decided that the female adventure line that they were working on should be the female He-Man characters that the boys department was developing for Masters of the Universe. So the girls department commandeered the concept, commandeered the characters that were being worked on, and brought it over to the girls department, and She-Ra, Princess of Power evolved from there. That's the way it looks. The timeline of things isn't 100% clear, but the start for Princess of Power has beginnings in both Masters of the Universe and Princess of Power, in particular the villains. The villains of Princess of Power, for the most part, are in the Masters of the Universe toy line. A portion of the villainous faction for Princess of Power remains in the toy line, mostly represented by Catra. At some point, Catra is aided by Entrapta, who was introduced in the second wave of figures, and the two of them remain to be the only two characters in the Princess of Power toy line who are recognized as Horde villains. Catra herself would be either a lone, independent villain, she would be interpreted that way, or she would be interpreted as a Horde villain. But I digress. We're going to go back and discuss a little bit of her development more. Justine Dancer designed the first looks for Catra, and her character evolved from that. The cat mask was there in the very beginning. Justine Dancer also designed a sword for Catra, but that part of the concept ended up being dropped and would end up turning up later on in Wave 3 with the Catra variant in 1987. The toy would not have Horde symbols. So some of the pictures that I feature here of the character designs, there were umpteen, I won't say umpteen thousand, that's a high number, but there were a lot of designs done for the characters. Hordak himself had a lot of different renditions before they settled on his look, and the same was true for Catra. And the designs that have been revealed so far by the Power and Honor Foundation, Justine Dancer herself, and other sources do not reveal early designs that featured the Horde symbol as being part of Catra's design. The toy itself would go on to not have a Horde symbol, and none of the variants featured in the Princess of Power toy line, there were 3 Catra figures total in the toy line. None of the designs would ever take on a Horde symbol. And so that could be because perhaps Catra was not always intended to be a Horde villain. She was not wholly depicted as a Horde villain in the Princess of Power mini comics. There is only one time in the entire run of the mini comic series where Catra is depicted as a Horde villain. For much of the line, she's her own boss. The prototype that was revealed by He-Man.org for Catra in the first wave of toys features Catra with a primarily red, silver, and black color scheme. Because of testing, I presume, the red was dropped. It was too harsh of a color, too hard of a color for a girl's line. And so the red was replaced with pink. So typically, there are variations of pink with the Catra figures throughout the 3 years of the Princess of Power toy line's run. I've heard rumors of there being red Catras, but I have never actually seen a red Catra. So if any of you out there have seen a red Catra or have a red Catra, I would love to get pictures of that. Catra was usually depicted with reds in her design in the mini comics, the storybooks by either Ladybird Books or Golden Books, and of course in the cartoon as well. But there are depictions where her suit is purple or even pink, which is what her toy line features her with. Interestingly enough, with all of the variants that I had discussed before, it's pretty clear that Catra shares her role as main villain with Hordak. In the Masters of the Universe toy line, Hordak was the ruthless leader of the evil Horde, and he himself had 3 figures released in 1985, 1986, and 1987. In those 3 years, Catra as well had figures released. 1 initial figure and 2 variants. This shows that she can be classified as a faction leader along with Hordak, although she didn't really have a faction. And in many forms of fiction, she herself is a minion of Hordak. In the mini comics, Catra is introduced in the first story, The Story of She-Ra. And Very similar to Skeletor, she's seeking out the power of the Crystal Castle. So in the comic series, the Crystal Castle isn't hidden like it is in the cartoon series. The cartoon series, Crystal Castle is at the top of Skydancer Mountain, and it's hidden away from the villains of the series, and it's a sanctuary for She-Ra. In the toy line, the Crystal Castle isn't hidden. It's Adora's home. It's labeled that in the toy line, and Catra often makes attempts to raid the castle. It's labeled the palace, so fills a role very similar to Bright Moon in the toy line. So all of the heroic characters are at the Crystal Castle. They make their home there. They're lounging around at the castle, and when there's trouble, they leave the castle to go snuff out the trouble. So again, Catra is chasing after the secrets and the powers that Crystal Castle holds, and that is pretty much the role that she plays for a certain portion of the mini comic series. In the middle part of the run of the series, she takes on a more lighter, mischievous role, casting silly little spells and trying to make the world cold and making gardens grow into weeds and silly little plot lines like that. And it's not until the Wave 3 mini comics, there's only 2 of those, that she seems to take on more of a nefarious role that harkens back to the earlier mini comics and actually puts her in the role of being a Horde villain. That's part 1 of the Catra Comprehensive Review. Join me next time for part 2 of the review of Catra.